I'm glad that we are discussing books at this conference. Even though it's the last day, we are making slow progress into a direction where open access books are being seen as as part of the open access conversation. I don't really know what a presentation, a panel discussion, and a keynote sets each other apart, but I'm trying to do my best here and give you a little bit of my view and what we think at Knowledge Unlatched, how books might develop in open access. I think in general, open access is a changing landscape. We see that there are a lot of changes and structural changes in APC-based business models in journals. Major funders are reviewing their policies, Wellcome being one of them, the German Research Foundation, and a number of others. And they have to acknowledge, as well as policymakers on the European Union level, for example, have to do, that reaching their targets means more than they have done so far. They need more to invest more effort into open access to really reach the numerical targets and I think also the political targets they have set themselves. It is clear that in the library world, projects, flipping projects like Project Deal and comparable initiatives are off to a very good start. It's really impressive to see how libraries are coordinating on a completely different level now than they did probably 5 years ago, but they still have to prove their impact on basically the reality in libraries and in publishing houses. Hybrid models are obviously coming to an end sooner or later, and it seems that libraries at the same time, and I think that's the most important component, the grassroots movement of libraries is investing more money into open access, not just journals, but also into books. And I think what we will see in the next wave of open access is a diversification in business models, in funding streams, and in content types. And that is a special challenge to a field, especially for open access books, where we are faced with a very fragmented landscape. That is very much different between books and journals. I think it's obvious that open access for monographs can really be a solution to the monograph crisis, as it's called by many. A lot of research output and publication of research output under normal circumstances has become financially non-viable. So publishers are journalizing, especially the large publishers, are journalizing their book production, creating big deals, big packages, to really make sure that the financing structure works for them for small-scale monographs as well. It seems that open access is one of the funding sources for publishers, and that is certainly the publisher perspective, which is important as well. I think there are probably more publishers out there now with an open access policy than there are libraries, which is really interesting if you look at the scene and the conversations over the last 15 years. It seems that publishers have very much adopted and embraced open access publishing for books. I think they still have a visibility issue. It is not really clear what publishers do in open access publishing, each and every publisher. There are grave differences between the United Kingdom, for example, and continental Europe, but it is very clear that publishers have an answer to open access when it comes to monographs. I think many of us still struggle with limited reach. Scaling is an issue because it is, as for journals in the very early stages and phases of open access, still a scaling problem, and that is something that I want to look at a little bit. So why books? Obviously, books are important, and you see that people like to decorate their living room still, like the former German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt on the left-hand side, with books. That is not just to say, I didn't have another idea about the wall painting, but it is saying I'm a person who has actually read all these titles. It is a significant stream of knowledge that is being communicated in textbooks, for example, in universities like this one. There's a high reputation of the first monograph for early stage researchers in the humanities and social sciences. And it is very clear that there are still barriers. In some disciplines, there was an interesting workshop last week in London at the British Academy on the barriers to open access in monographs. One interesting point, for example, are third-party rights. Copyrights are still very different by jurisdiction. And there's also a relatively low degree of innovation when it comes to what else can a digital book, an open access book, do. For example, in fields like media studies. Just a plain text with a few hyperlinks probably doesn't do. I think we could do much better there in many disciplines. For academics, I believe, and that became very clear last week at that workshop as well, they simply don't want to give up on books. There will always be a case for them to publish in books, and they have doubts that open access, still doubts that open access is a good solution to that. Sometimes because they're ill-informed about it, sometimes because there are real barriers to moving their own books into open access. Let's look at the publisher's side. I've tried to find a few publishers here, and this is just an overview of those that publicize their numbers and their revenue split by product type publicly. Do you think that any of these publishers could do without books? I don't really think so. In a market which is stagnating, where there's almost no growth anymore, these publishers and publishing clearly cannot do without a healthy book business in whatever kind of business model. And at the same time, books are still less than 10% of the total open access market. And I've just compared the directory of open access books and the directory of open access journals to give you a little bit of an overview of the fragmentation of the market. DOAB has 280 publishers, is much younger than DOAJ, for example, which only has 63 publishers. The content being published there is vastly different. So the challenge that we have in books is a fragmented market. There are many small players. There is almost no entry barriers to the market of book publishing. There are multiple languages which are really important in book publishing, much more so than in journals. And it is intransparent to both academics and publishers how new business models develop beyond their own discipline or beyond their own publishers. So there is simply no market transparency at this point. Trade partners like ProQuest and a lot of others, EBSCO, play an important role in the field, and to put it mildly, they are not at the forefront of innovation when it comes to open access, but rather follow a sit-and-wait strategy. And I think that is something that really has to change looking at the open access field. And that is really different from journal publishing, where I would say that trade partners and vendors are more or less writing an invoice, but that's about it. They are not really in the process of disintermediating intermediating the market. And there are certainly funding issues, because monographs are most likely, and we can see that in reality, much more important to fund in open access, much more expensive to fund in open access than journals are. Looking at the problems, and I don't want to basically kill the whole debate on the panel, which I think will be really interesting. Looking at problems that we have been working at Knowledge Unlatched, but I think a broader ecosystem approach is necessary for, are basically two major fields. First of all, we are in an early stage market still. So there are so many ideas out there, and it seems really important to differentiate your own business model within open access books against other open access business models. And it is a little bit like a soapbox race, right? It's all very colorful, but all very small. And the question really is this something that libraries and the large information providers in the world can work with? Market intransparency is never bad unless for those who are already starting into those markets, because no transparency usually means no deal. That is probably a new reality in academic publishing. In the past, with Publish or Perish, you had to somehow get to your audiences. I think that has changed dramatically with the internet and some other, let's call them illegal service providers in the field. The second area that I want to look into is really, like, first of all, the double dipping issue. It's the same issue as for journals. So how do we make sure that the different revenue streams are really in parallel and not being mixed in a way that libraries effectively pay several times for the same content? And I think what we have not really focused at as a group of open access book guys is the proof of impact. Why should people do the second book again in open access once they've done the first book? Do they really know what the impact was. What was the difference between doing it in open access and not? I think what's really needed in the market at this point is transparency and simplicity. Launching new business models, if you look at the whole startup scene, you cannot do that with the complexity of an established industry as academic publishing that has developed over hundreds of years. So, so far, the market has been developed largely without the innovation from the biggest publishers in the field. And that is an exception, I think, in academic publishing. And that is also something that sets books apart from journals, where some of the big publishers, at least one of the big publishers, was very eager to push open access for journals in the beginning, while another one was not at all. But I think we don't have that situation for books. We have a landscape where there is a lot of small, innovative ideas that need to scale to really become relevant. But to this scalability, only very few people pay attention. And that is also true to a certain extent, and Francis Pinter, the founder of Knowledge Unlatched, always says that. I was happy when I saw that it would work. I didn't need to scale it. I needed somebody else to scale it. And I think that's really interesting, and I think speaks for the sector, because a lot of people think that way. Many models out there, many new initiatives, all very small funding requirements. What does that mean for libraries that are by now used to big deals and spending money in rather large chunks? It is a lot of additional work, a lot of intellectual discourse that you have to have, and a lot of coordination that really is an issue. We at Knowledge Unlatched believe we need marketplaces to address this issue, and a marketplace, first of all, means that everybody has their own stand, but that everybody is putting their stands on one place in the center of the city. That's what we are trying to do with something which we will launch at the end of September. We call that open funding, and the idea is to really compare all BPC, book processing charges, or whatever you want to call them, to not have a political implication with it, any funding mechanism for single titles and open access books, and create a database out of that and really ease the processes between publishers and libraries. We feel that this overview is needed to get away from the soapbox races, basically, and make this a more efficient place, which academic publishing has always been. It is not just about content and the greatness of content, it is also about efficiency, and that's why I think there's academic publishing. Efficiency and impact, there is a lot of experience, there is a lot of tradition, and in this rapidly changing environment, when publishers, for example, talk to us at Knowledge Unlatched, if authors talk to presses about publishing open access, we are just continuing how this industry has always been, based on gut feeling. There is nobody who is doing an analysis of which titles should be open access in books and which shouldn't, based on economic usage or whatever reasons. And I think we can do much better there now in this environment. So using analytics for decision making is one thing. Secondly, what's really important is that publishers also share their usage data. And I've had a lot of interviews with publishers over the last few weeks, asking them how often do you share your usage data for a specific title with the author. More than 70% say they never do in open access. It becomes very clear from the conversations that there are a lot of researchers to whom royalties are important. And if you ask them why, is it about the money? Then they say, not really, it's nice to have the money, but I can see how much the book has sold, how much impact it has had in numbers, which is being reported like frequently. I think that is something that we have to look into as well, and really make it a standard and a norm in open access publishing to share the analysis of impact, whether it's download, usage, social media interaction, whatever, with researchers, so that they can really see it makes sense to engage in this business model. I think it would be a great sign of the industry if we would make all usage data open anyways. So there should be an open access usage data repository from both libraries and publishers, so that we get around all these normalization issues and everything which is out there, so that everybody can go to a numerical database, do the analysis, ask the questions, to those numbers that are out there and get the answers that the numbers give. What we are trying to do at Knowledge Unlatched right now, we have created this problem ourselves, by the way, because we are trying to host open access books in as many instances as possible, because we want to maximize reach. So we are working with OAPN, of course, with JSTOR, with Project Muse, with BiblioBoard, and many others. And then we are there with our mess. We have a lot of usage stats. We give them back to publishers, Excel sheet by Excel sheet. That obviously doesn't make sense. So what we are doing now is basically consolidating them all into one structure so that the publisher can easily say, this title of Brill, de Gruyter, whomever, has been downloaded on the platforms that we cover, and there's certainly more usage out there, X number of times. And I think usage and impact really is at the heart of open access. It is not just about making content open and let it sit somewhere and wait for reactions. I think we have also to show that efficiency. To not basically waste too much time from the panel conversation, I think it is a decisive point, a tipping point that we are at right now. Journals in open access mature. We can see that over the last years already. The growth in open access books is still strong. And in an industry where there's little growth in the major blocks, basically, being content from journals and books and not so much from services in this case, I think publishers and others have to turn to open access books in their own economic interest. I think right now libraries are the bottleneck because libraries have to change funding significantly, and we have had 15, 20 years of political debate of how to push open access. It is now there, and now you have to put the money where the mouth is, or however you say in English. I think it's really important that libraries, also small libraries, make a significant commitment and clearly show that X% of their budget goes into open access. And that does not mean self-interest in the way of KU gets that budget. Don't get me wrong. Whoever gets it, I think it is important that we clearly have the commitment of the library world. We are seeing that from a number of places already, but I think we have to be faster there in order to achieve the goals and to give publishers the security so that they and the good feeling that they can further invest into open access, especially for books, because it requires investments. Publication habits will change. I think we have seen that in journals already. That will be the case in books again as well. You can see that a generation of researchers starting now, their academic careers take open access much more for granted than other generations did. I have high hopes there, and I think librarians have done a great job there in really educating researchers and academics that were basically growing in a certain institution. I think we still have some bottlenecks in other fields. I think libraries will continue to play a central role in open access funding. I think they have to adapt their structures. That's at least what every librarian whom I'm talking to tells me. It is a structural issue within the library as well that needs to be addressed, and I think it's high time to really work on that. A number of libraries do that, and I'm particularly pleased to see that there are so many like mid-range by size and research output libraries, for example in Germany or in Austria, Switzerland right now, who change their approach to open access and really make a commitment. And I think there need to be marketplaces, mediators to facilitate this idea that there is one ecosystem out there. And I think we should not overemphasize the differences between colors of open access, by which I don't mean gold and green, but moderate, boring, radical, whatever you want to call it. I simply don't care. I think it is really about creating as much openness as possible and do it in an ethical way. And you can be you can do that in all kinds of shades. And I think it's really important that we send that image and that message as well, that there is one shared goal, which is openness in books as well as it is in journals. Thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm happy to take any question, of course, or provocation, radical, whatever kind. Thanks.
Hi, Mark Patterson from eLife. I was curious about there's loads of really interesting stuff in there. The business about sharing usage data, making that open, was really intriguing. Have you talked about that? I can see the problem of multiple platforms, and so you need to aggregate usage data and all this kind of thing. Have you discussed that with the other publishers, and what's the reception been like, and what do you think might happen there?
Yeah, so we have had a number of different conversations over the last 1.5 years. I think there is, with some, really an openness where people say, sure, why not? And others who say, no, we own these data. Because everybody believes that data is the new gold, whatever, or oil, or whatever kind of BS. I think there will be still a real world out there beyond data. Obviously, they help us a lot in doing certain things, but let's kind of boil it down again. So I think there is an interest in that. I think it would need a central infrastructure for that to really share them. But I mean, let's just start with a few like-minded publishers who are interested in this. You can do it for books and journals together. It would probably also help researchers in making the decision about the format. Do I write a journal article? Is it really better than a monograph? What do I want to achieve? I think if all these analytics at a certain point come in and people can benchmark different things against each other, they will make other decisions than they make today. And I can imagine that there is a group of publishers and initiatives who is really willing to share this, yeah. Maybe a new project for Apen, Elko.
Well, there are some initiatives. We can talk about that later, yeah.
Well, so I was just going to ask, Crossref was looking at this, weren't they? Usage data, and I've lost track of where they are with that. Jeff's not here at the moment, is he?
Oh, yes, up there.
So there are two mechanisms through which people could report usage data. One, and the discussion here was about openly reporting this, is through event data. So the idea would be that you could actually push that information, if you can gather it, into a system where we can expose it. There's another effort that's involved that's designed to exchange usage data privately, but I don't think that would apply here. That's mostly having to do with people trying to track usage on scholarly sharing networks and things like that, and subscription-based content.
Yeah.
Georg Botz, Max Planck Society. This is not a question, just a remark, or maybe a hint. Unfortunately, there was some delay, but I would like to mention that there will be soon a policy paper by Science Europe with principles and recommendations for open access monograph policies. Addressing some, this is not a full-blown study of the landscape, there are others, but we want to give guidance to the membership of Science Europe and beyond, maybe librarians, publishers, etc., what to take into account when they want to develop new open access monograph policies. And I hope that the governing board will approve this draft soon, so in a few weeks' time this will be published. And it will contribute to this debate, hopefully.
Great. Mm-hmm. And I think there as well, if I may add, I think I think there are different initiatives out there right now which have already tried to address this, because there was this, we at Knowledge Unlatched did that as well on the quality of open access books, both on the content side regarding peer review and so on, but also on the technical side. And that really comes out of a demand in the market where publishers say we always have to negotiate with librarians for funding, again, certain criteria. Everybody is coming up with their own criteria, and I think that's quite normal in such a phase that this developing open access book market is in. But it is really time now to broaden that movement. Oops, no, you can't say that with Americans in the room. So to broaden these initiatives, that we get more and more people working into the same direction and not making too much differences in marginal fields. I think that is something where our industry has always been great at, to differentiate and not to unite, but I think it's really time to make it as easy as possible and then start from there and differentiate later if needed.
Hi Sven, thank you for your talk. It's Danny again. I'm realising my assumptions were probably completely wrong. So when Springer Nature made the recent announcement, which was great, that they had 30 million downloads of books and book chapters, excellent, and I wrote back and said what would be really helpful is having some understanding about comparative downloads across a discipline, because obviously some things are going to be more interesting to more people than others. The response was, yes, there is some breakdown of that information, but they won't offer comparative information for non-OA books because this is commercial in confidence. So, which I sort of understand in some ways, because I think especially if they're low, it's not a good thing to be publicising. But then you're saying that the reasons why the download statistics for the open access material is not being shared, not necessarily because they're low and embarrassing, but actually because this is considered to be our information we're not prepared to share. And I find that extraordinary. Can you elucidate more about? I mean, to me that just seems counterproductive. If you've got good numbers, wouldn't you be going, isn't this great, why don't more people join in? It just seems really odd to me.
Well, I think there are two approaches, and I'm not commenting on the business approach that Springer Nature is taking here for good reasons. But I think in general, you always, as a commercial enterprise, are in a situation where you feel that you should protect certain information that might give your competitors an advantage over you. That's clear. And that's certainly not helpful if you have a book where you sold in a BPC for £10,000 and it has 3 downloads. I think there are both elements to it, but the question really is who owns usage? Is it a publisher owning usage? Is it a library owning usage? I don't think so. I think usage is an information that is a commodity that is out there. That's why we have standards, and that should be provided in the market. And yes, I think that might be a consequence of discussions with librarians in the past where you calculate cost per downloads completely without any context, and you just look at a number and say, oh, the cost per downloads in ancient history are much higher than in orthopedics. Yeah, that makes sense, right? But why calculate it? Why compare it? So I think there are both sides to it. The one that publishers have to provide these data, or initiatives like KU and others, and the other side, that you also need to be diligent about how to use these data and not just compare things and well, if I may say so, abuse data in a situation of negotiation, because that's what libraries have done quite a lot over the last 2 or 3 decades. So I think it has both elements. We have done a little bit of an exercise at KU earlier this year with what we called Open Access Heroes. We made a little bit of a poster and wanted to see, so what are the top downloaded disciplines, authors, and we didn't know. So we had to kind of put together all kinds of data from different sources that does not live up to academic standards in a way that a statistician would say, that's great. It is just an approximation, but it gives us an idea of where there is a lot of activity. And I think if you then see titles where you only have 5 downloads, yeah, that's the reality. That, I mean, 5 is really too low, but 200, I think that is something which is a reality and that we have to take into account more from an academic perspective, less from a commercial perspective.
Thank you very much. I thought that was very interesting, and indeed I think it's important also to focus on books. My question is a very practical question, because I could imagine that with books, and you showed the slide where there is these people with the books in the background, you know, people want to have a printout. So a printout is much more important than with a journal article. And how is this factored in the pricing? Wouldn't that make open access to books much more expensive?
Well, I think, as I said, it's a very fragmented space right now. I think it really depends how you look at it. First of all, I think it is important for books still that open access publishers offer a printed edition, and I don't know anybody who doesn't do that. So I think it is really important, but that is a misconception with academics oftentimes, that they believe there are open access publishers that don't offer a print version, and there are quality presses that don't offer open access as a business model. I think both assumptions are wrong, and you can see them in some markets like the UK much more much stronger than you see them, for example, in Germany. I think putting, and that is now the publisher's perspective, if you are able to work with print on demand, which most publishers are by now, there is no cost, no significant cost to a printed version of a book if you do open access. So I think if you have certain pre-press services that are linked to the book, that's a different story, but you need that for a digital version, for an open access version as well. But I think to argue we are doing a print version and this costs extra, there's no point for doing that. There might be extra revenue coming from the print book, of course, which then blurs the profitability of the open access / print title. But there I would say, you know, why don't we let publishers their little extra profit on print books where we know that they sell only 250 copies anyways? Forget about it. It's not relevant for the overall spending, for the overall direction for open access books. It is just a marginal number compared to what we have to spend on open access books anyways. And if there are target groups who want printed books, and if there are librarians, by the way, who still want to buy printed books because even though there is an open access version, either they have their reasons or they have a problem with their bosses. I don't care. Both is possible, I think.
Sorry, you say publishers are dependent on their book publishing program. So I always understood, you know, that books don't make publishers money, certainly not monographs, and that and these large publishers, these last examples, Brill, de Gruyter, Wiley, how are they dependent on their books program?
Well, you can say that a lot of books, and I think that's accurate, a lot of book programs are not as profitable as journals, first of all, which are probably losing profitability in a move to open access as well. I think that's another story. But I think what's very clear from these numbers, if a publisher or if the whole market loses 58% of the revenue line and is stuck with a cost, you can imagine what that means to the market. So publishers might not have books as a very profitable business, but it covers a lot of the infrastructural cost. It adds a lot of complexity, of course, as well. But I think at this point, if you are not one of those publishers that focus solely on journals, you would need a time for adaptation to move completely out of book publishing. So it clearly is a contributor to your profitability because it basically pays for your infrastructural and housing cost.
Okay, final question. KU has started out as a crowdfunding mechanism for making books open access, working with publishers and libraries. Then when you took over, you quickly branched out into different areas. You added journals, you added presses actually that were funded through Knowledge Unlatched. You're adding STM content now, and you're adding all sorts of additional services. So where is KU heading?
Frankly, and that is the truth, I don't know. Because 50%, really, I don't know. 50% of what's happening at KU, I could have never imagined at the beginning of this journey, when was it, 2.5 years ago, because it is a lot of that is based on demand from publishers, from libraries, and so on. So the idea about KU Open Funding, for example, was not even our own idea, but a large consortium approached us and said, listen, there is this gap, and we feel that you could probably fill it because you speak with 100 publishers regularly and 500 libraries. Can you develop something there? So it is really like on demand, and what we are trying to do is to stay as much as we can as a company in the background because we want to be a neutral infrastructure provider. So it is, we don't want to be the next new university press, but rather somebody who provides an infrastructure so that everybody can utilize that. So in that respect, I feel that the tests that we have been doing over the last years, like French language and German language, for example, so non-English language content, journals, STM, all give us indications of where the market moves. So we see in this pledging round, for example, that it is much easier to get libraries' commitment for STM content, also for open access books, than it is for HSS books content. But you only find out when you try, right? And that's what we are trying to do, and with a lot of support from publishers who sometimes get a little bit annoyed because we contact them on a bi-weekly basis, more or less, with a new idea. Daniel is smiling already, being one of them, and Matt. So that happens quite frequently, and that is not because we are so chaotic in our structure. I guess we are pretty German in our structure, orderly, but it is really a consequence, more or less, of the fact that so many things pop up short term, and we try to jump in and fill the gap.
Thank you, Sven.
Thanks.
This ends the keynote. Thank you again.
Thank you.